your bhakti. So the conclusion was that in general, being dishonest, unless it has some very beneficial purpose, would not be good for bhakti and would not be recommended, not be advised. And honesty is a Brahminical quality. So now I have another question for you. There's not really a right or wrong answer, but it's a question for discussion. Let's say a person becomes a devotee. And by nature, or by culture, or by training, they're not that honest. Maybe some people have that nature. They're a little crooked. They're not straightforward. Some people may come from a culture where not being straightforward is normal. That's just how you survive. Some people may have grown up in a family where they didn't learn the value of honesty because, whatever reason, maybe the family, if they were honest, they couldn't survive. Or it made life easier if you just told lies. So now they become a devotee. And they're practicing Krishna consciousness for 10 years. Will they necessarily be any more honest 10 years later? In other words, I'm asking the word necessarily. Necessarily means, would it automatically happen that 10 years later, that problem with dishonesty would not be there after 10 years of doing bhakti, despite the conditioning, despite having the nature perhaps of not being honest, karmically, perhaps coming from a culture where honesty is not valued, would they be honest? Necessarily be honest. Necessarily means automatically, or is it guaranteed they would be honest? So I throw that question out to you. What do you say?
No.
No. He says no. Who says yes? Okay, let's take a vote. How many necessarily? Necessarily means definitely they will be. So how many say definitely they will be after 10 years? They'll overcome that problem to be dishonest. Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how many say not necessarily would they be honest? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So more of you think they wouldn't, it's not guaranteed they would be. And less of you think that automatically they would be, and I think you're both right. Because in some cases they would be, and in some cases they wouldn't be. Then you might ask, why wouldn't they be? Does that mean they're not good devotees? And does it mean that the ones who overcame that problem were better devotees? Or does it mean the ones who overcame that problem, it wasn't really a big problem? But the ones who didn't overcome it, it was a big problem. And I think all those answers are correct. So, the point I'm trying to make is that you could apply this example to many things, not just honesty. You could apply it to other natures you may bring to Krishna consciousness. And 10 years later, you may find you still have that nature. For example, let's say, okay, we'll ask another question. Of course, now you know the answer. Let's say you come to Krishna consciousness and you're a very how should we say? You're a person that basically just keeps to themselves. You're not very social. You don't have a lot of close relationships. You don't have a lot of friends. If you go to a party, you'll sit in the corner. If no one talks to you, you'll just text on your phone. Some people are like that. So this one is easier to answer. After you've been a devotee for 10 years, would you be different? How many of you say yes? How many of you say no? Now and how many don't know? Well, if you don't know, that's the right answer, because again, it definitely could bring someone out of their shell, but it may not. 10, 20, 30 years later, they may still be a very private person. They may not like interacting closely with other people because that's just how they are. It's not broadcasting? But it says there's 10 people on there. Maybe your connection isn't good. Oh. Maybe her connection isn't good. Yeah. 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 We're talking about association of devotees. It's separating yourself from devotees. Because of a certain nature you have. Before you were a devotee, you kept away from people. Maybe that was good. Now you become a devotee, you still like to be alone. You don't have many friends. You don't talk. There's new people. You don't meet anybody new. You walk with your head down, you don't look at anybody, because that's your nature. That's what we meant, something like that. And so some devotees think after being a devotee, that would change. And some devotees think after being a devotee, it wouldn't change. And they're both right. It depends on the person. And as I said, you could apply this to many things. And the point I'm making is that in some cases, someone has a problem, but they're not aware of it. And in that case where the problem doesn't naturally go away, because either it's deeply rooted or their devotional life is not powerful enough, that problem may remain. So in this class, we're talking about integrity. Now let me give you an example. We tell people we're going to do things. Oh yeah, I'll bring that for you tomorrow. Oh Prabhu, I heard you're giving class, I'm coming. So often people say they're coming and they don't come. It's common. I'll talk to you tomorrow, we'll do this. Tomorrow comes. I'm going to be in the temple at 7, I'll bring you the pen drive. 7 o'clock, they're not there. That's common, right? It's just the way life is. Now, when you're developing relationships with people, it's not good to do that, because people don't take you seriously, they can't trust you. And when you're working in an organization, you want to work efficiently, it's not good to do that, because maybe I needed that pen drive because I was going to go home at 7 and work on something that somebody needed at 8 o'clock, and I told them I'd have it at 8, and now you didn't come with the pen drive, your phone's off, I call you, and it's creating a chain reaction because they needed to give it to somebody at 8:30. Right? So, but we all do this. And we all don't remember half the things we tell people we're going to do. Isn't it? I mean, think of all the things, the little things you say. Oh yeah, I'm going to do that. Oh yeah, we'll do this. And we don't even realize we're saying it. And we forget. It's a very common problem. We're having meetings, we're having classes, we're having seminars. They start at a certain time. And what do we think? Some of us think, I'll get there when I get there. It doesn't really matter. Like now we're having meetings and they start at a certain time, we break at a certain time, we return at a certain time. So some people tend to always be there exactly on time, some tend to be a little late. It's kind of a programming. And the people that tend to be a little late, in this meeting, the average age of people in the movement are 40 years. So they were probably a little late when they were bhaktas, and now 40 years later, they're still a little late, because that's just how they are. And so all that chanting of Hare Krishna, it doesn't say necessarily in Shastra, if you chant Shuddhanam, then you'll be on time for meetings. At least I haven't read that. It doesn't say if you chant Shuddhanam, you'll remember when you tell somebody you're going to do something, that you'll do it. So sometimes it requires awareness of a problem and focus. That this is the nature I have, and I have to deal with it. So if we're using the example here of honesty, and if we expand the definition of honesty to say, I do what I tell people to do, although if I don't bring you the pen drive, I don't think I'm dishonest. Who would think they're dishonest if they said, I'm going to be there at 7 and I show up at 7:30? We don't think that way. But what if I said, that's dishonest, because you said you would be there at 7? And I gave you that definition. You said you were going to bring this at 7 o'clock. You said we were going to meet at 4 o'clock and talk about this, and then I come to your house and you're not there because you forgot. And then I say, you're dishonest. You wouldn't really accept it. But for this discussion, because we're talking about honesty, let's use this as a definition of honesty, because we did say we were going to do something and we didn't do it. So you could define that as being a liar. You liar, you said you were going to come at 7 o'clock and you didn't. You're a liar. Right? Now, we were told Prabhupada would leave for his morning walks at a specific time. He would have an entourage that would go with him. He would not wait for them at that time he left, because that's the time he leaves. So he just left. So that's how he operated. Everything was done by clockwork. And so if you're not there, you don't go. So the reason you might think, well, what does this really have to do with anything that's Krishna conscious? Well, this is the way I see it. I told you I was going to meet you at 7 o'clock and bring you the pen drive, and I just forgot. Or I didn't forget, but I got up late, or I was hungry, so I ate before I really was hungry, I started to leave the house, but I got really hungry at like 10 to 7, and I went back, I had to eat something, so that's why I'm late. And let's say that's kind of how I do things. If I say 7, in my mind it means, well, maybe it's 7 tomorrow, or maybe if it's not tomorrow, it's the next day. But one day I'll be there at 7. That's how I think. That's just my definition of 7. So let's say, or I tell you I'm going to do things, but I just forget. Oh yeah, I'm coming from this country, I'll bring you this. You told me that 3 months ago, and then you come and you completely forgot that you told me you'd bring me that. Very common. So now we take vows. Those are bigger things, bigger promises. But a potential problem is when we do that with little things, it influences the bigger things. Because if it's okay to come at 7 on Wednesday when I told you Tuesday, then why isn't it okay to chant 8 rounds a day when I told you 16? Because after all, it's kind of the same thing. It's a similar mentality. Does that make sense? Now you're thinking, No, when I say 16, that can't be like coming Wednesday. It is different, granted, but the mentality is very similar. Because if I say, I'll come at 7 and I come at 7:30, I've already rationalized 7 to 7:30, right? It's a rationalization. I've rationalized 7 on Tuesday to Wednesday because I was hungry. I mean, you know, what do you expect? I was hungry, so I just don't come on time. So the problem is that little things can become big things. So it's good to be aware that we have habits in nature that we bring with us when we become devotees. And the problem of thinking that just by being a devotee that they'll go away, one of the biggest problems is, and I'm not saying it won't in every case, but one of the biggest problems is you don't become aware of it or work on it because you think it's going to go away. It's like you have a disease and you read in a magazine that if you just drink 2 quarts of water or 2 liters of water every day, you walk for an hour and a half, and you eat 1 green salad and one fresh juice, you'll be healthy. So you do that and you just figure, whatever problem I have with this or that that's wrong in my body, it'll go away because this article says if you do this, you'll be healthy, and people who do this became healthy. But maybe you have a specific problem that needs addressing, and you're not addressing it because you think this will address everything. And in some cases, that little problem will be cured, and in some cases, it won't be cured unless you address it. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Arguments? So let me just finish my train of thought. Because I study this, I think about it a lot, and I'm looking at myself in my own integrity, because whatever I teach, I feel obligated to follow so that it has some potency when I teach it. So just like today, they're asking us, please be on time. So it's morning, then we take a break, then we come back, then we take a break, we go for lunch. So it's 4, I think it's 1, 2, 3. So it's 4 times a day we have to be there at a certain time. So I'm very conscious of that, because when they say be back at this time, internally I'm saying, okay, don't you do that? I'm saying, we're going to break for 10 minutes, come back at 7 o'clock. Then you'll think, okay, 7 o'clock. Some of you come at 7, 7:05, 7:10, because that's your 7 o'clock. It stretches. So I started becoming conscious. Oh, I said I was going to do this, so I'll do it. And then I'm studying this topic a little more, and I'm learning how forgetful people are, and how often we just don't remember when we say things. It's the nature of the mind. And that when you become conscious that you made a commitment, you start to become more careful about following through. Like I may say, Lolita, why don't you, she has to record something, and say, so why don't you come over Monday night at 7? And if I don't write it down, there's a good chance that I will forget, and then my wife says that my daughter's going to this performance and she wants you to go, and I leave at 6:30. Lolita comes over at 7. I completely forgot. Has that ever happened to you? Anybody? Yes. So why is that happening? Because we said something, but it didn't register that I'm actually supposed to do that. It didn't get importance that when I say something, I'm supposed to do it. More or less, right? Now, if you start realizing that you do that, and now you're aware of it, you'll probably do it less. Right? Because you realize that I do tell people I'm going to do things, and I don't always do them. I just actually forget that I tell them. Or I'm going to bring you the keys tomorrow, and I forget. So now I'm aware that I do that. that I say things that I don't do. When I bring awareness to it, I stop doing it. Or I stop doing it, I do it less often. Now, don't you think, all right, I want to tell you a story. Hold your questions, because some of the questions throw me off track, and I want to stay on track. There's this nice story. In America, there was a president. This isn't from the Puranas. This is from American history, but it's a good story. So there was a president named Abraham Lincoln. You may have heard of him. And he was one of the great presidents of America. If you read what he has written, he's very articulate, very intelligent, very deep, cultured, moral, religious. So he was traveling with a friend, and then the friend said, "Would you like some whiskey?" And he said, "No, I won't take any whiskey." But later on the trip, he said, "Would you like a cigar?" And he said to his friend, "Well, I could enjoy a cigar. Would you like me to enjoy a cigar?" And he said, "Yes." You know cigars? He said, "When I was young," Abraham Lincoln said to his friend, "when I was young, my mother became ill, and when she knew she was going to die, she called me into her room and she said, 'Abe,' or Abraham, 'make me a promise that you will never drink alcohol and you will never smoke.'" And then he promised. So he turned to his friend and he told his friend that story. And he said, "Do you think I should break the promise to my mother and smoke this cigar?" And his friend immediately said, "No." He said, "I wish I could have made that promise to my mother. I would pay thousands of dollars," which in those days was probably like 100,000. I would have paid thousands of dollars if I could have made that promise to my mother. So that was kind of a big promise. It's like one of the regulative principles. But the point is, to me, and I think this is an issue which many devotees misunderstand, and this is what I want to talk about tonight, so hold your questions. It's not as much of an issue of restraining from smoking or drinking or any of the regulative principles as we think. Like, in other words, let's say I was drinking beer every day, now I become a devotee, so I say, this is a real challenge for me to refrain from beer. This is my challenge. Or I was drinking tea every day. It's a challenge to refrain from tea. Or whatever your vice was. But it goes deeper than that. Because is it about that vice, or is it about your integrity? Because you did promise not to do that. And if your integrity to your promise is strong, you're probably not going to do it, even though it's your weakness. So we just had a workshop on vows, and I asked a question, and I'll ask it to you. 2 people have made a vow not to drink beer. And they're equally challenged. They both have the same amount of attraction to drinking beer. So it's equally difficult for them to control it. One has a high level of integrity. One has a low level of integrity. What are the chances of the person with high integrity succeeding, and what are the chances of the person with low integrity succeeding? Obviously, the person with high integrity has a higher chance. Not because it's more difficult for the other person. It's equally difficult, but one has higher integrity, which means when he says something, he values it. And because he said he would do it, he values it. And therefore, that gives him the power to be able to avoid drinking alcohol, even though it's as difficult for him to avoid it as it is for the other person who says, "I'll give you the keys tomorrow," and forgets. And that's his nature. And I think this principle we overlook. We tend to look at the difficulty in following the vow rather than the difficulty of our own integrity. So let's say you break a vow. Well, let's use this example. he drinks the beer. What's his reason going to be? If you ask him, you promised your mother you wouldn't drink beer, and you did. Why did you do it? And he'll say something like, because from the age of 15, I've been drinking beer. And I made the promise at the age 20, and I did it for a year, but I'm so habituated to drinking beer, I couldn't do it. See, give some reason like that, don't you think? He'll look at the habit as the cause of the problem. Now look at any vow that you've made that you haven't kept and think of the reason. And how many of you came up with a reason? Think of something. It could be a little thing, just that you promised someone you would do something and you didn't. You promised you'd come on time, you came late. Now think of your reason. Why did you come late? I was hungry, I was tired, I walked slow, whatever your reason was. It wasn't important. I knew you were coming late, so I came late, whatever it is. Think of your reasons. How many of you thought of the reason that I couldn't follow it because it was a lack of integrity to my word? Raise your hand if any of you came up with that. So that's about 1/4 of us. So that means it's a problem. That means that most of us, of course, after just giving you that lecture, that also helps you realize what the problem was. But it means most of us generally will look at the problem, the difficulty in following the commitment because the nature of that commitment is difficult. We won't look at our relationship with our own level of commitment or our own level of integrity as the problem. Does that make sense? So I think this is super important because when you ask yourself, how am I going to follow this principle? It's very important to understand that if you know how to commit, you become empowered. Now, let's say, for example, let's say you had the power that when you said you were going to do something, once you said it, it was done. There was no question it wouldn't happen. I give my word. My word is as good as gold. It happens. Let's say that was your nature. It would be a little easier to follow our vows, wouldn't it? Because once you make it, that's it. It's going to be done. But let's say you don't have that nature. Then you make a vow. It starts becoming difficult to follow the vow. And your mind goes to focus on the difficulty. Not the integrity, not the commitment to my word, but the difficulty in following the vow. And then you might say something like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to follow this all my life. This is really difficult. Does that make sense? That because we haven't got, but okay, now let's say you had that integrity where you were so keyed in to this reality that whatever you say, you do, and you had that problem. Now imagine a problem you have, and imagine you feel this way. This is your consciousness. If I said it, I would do it. And just think, how do you feel about that challenge right now? Don't you feel it's not such a great challenge because you've already committed so deeply? That it's a challenge, but there's no possibility I will break it. Because I said I wouldn't, and that's it. It's finished. Does that make sense? Like, for example, there are people who do things they don't like doing. They do things they don't want to do. They do things that are difficult solely because they made a vow to do it and they're honoring their word. That's their nature. So that's why they do it. There's no other power in them. It's not easy. It's not natural. They don't even want to do it. Now, in the last workshop I was doing on vows, I was realizing something that I later found out that other people, I think psychologists, have spoken about. But there's a lot of talk now about self-esteem. When I was young, I never heard that word. Maybe it was out there, but I never heard anybody use it. I never heard my friends use it. I never heard my parents use it. When I became a devotee, I never heard other devotees use it. But in the last 10 or 20 years, I've heard that word used a lot. And self-esteem is kind of like you're proud of yourself, not in a negative kind of proud, but in a healthy pride. I'm proud of myself. I'm a good person. I'm proud of that. People like me. I'm proud of that. I got good grades. I'm proud of that. I have a good sense of myself as a good person. Now, when you say you're going to do something for someone and you don't, you know what happens? Even if you're not aware of this consciously, it wears away some of that, I'm a good person. I'm proud of myself. It wears it away even though you don't realize it, because you just did something that you said you wouldn't do, or you didn't do something that you said you would do. Now, we have a relationship with ourselves. We have a relationship with ourselves is how we feel about ourselves. And every time you say you're going to do something and you don't, it wears away a little of that positive sense of yourself, that I'm good, or I'm competent, I'm reliable, I'm powerful, even if you don't realize it. So that's one of the important factors of integrity. Because if you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, how do you feel? You feel a little bit disempowered, don't you? You'll feel a little bit guilty. You'll feel, how else will you feel? Give me some words. Diminished, deflated. What else?
Loser.
I am a loser. Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that even with these little commitments, it's actually building some character and strength within you. Even if it's just, I said I'd come at 7 and I come at 7. Even like we talk in the japa workshop, you shouldn't just chant your rounds to get them done, but you should chant quality rounds. But sometimes it so happens, due to circumstance, you're left late at night with rounds, and you're tired, and the rounds aren't good. But you finish them because of your integrity to your promise. And even though the rounds are bad, when you finish them, you feel good, at least because you finished your rounds. Not because the rounds were good, but you feel good that at least I chanted. Right? You have that experience? Sometimes you put your beads down and you go, those last 6 rounds were horrible, but I feel really good because it's 11 o'clock at night and I started chanting at 10:15 and I stayed awake and chanted, some really bad rounds, but I feel good because I actually did it. Right? And as we know, we are creatures of habit. So when you're habituated to do that, it becomes a habit. And that's just what you do. For example, you take devotees who have been in the movement for decades and who have chanted 16 rounds every day. It's become a habit. But that level of integrity to that vow, it's just, that's what they do. They cannot not do it. You understand? They cannot not chant 16 rounds. It's not possible to not chant. It's become a habit. Whereas if we go through periods where we don't, some days we do, some days we don't, some weeks we don't, then we've lost power. And it becomes very easy to say, I'm tired. I have so many rounds to make up. What does it matter if I add another 16? It's at about 4,000, When I retire, I'll just chant a few extra every day, for a few years, and I'll make up those 4,000 rounds. That's the thinking. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to bring your awareness that making promises and not carrying through can be wearing away your own sense of pride and confidence. It can be causing you to lose some power. It can be ingraining a bad habit, and it can be affecting the bigger vows. Now, look at today. Divorce rate is somewhere 40, 50% in America. And India will reach it. They'll come later, but they'll reach it. They may even surpass us. So the seeds are everywhere now in the world. What is actually happening? You want to really know what's happening? It's so interesting. This is one of the most interesting topics, and it's so relevant to this. When a boy meets a girl and they quote-unquote fall in love, you know what's actually happening? Love, what that love is, there's a chemical reaction. Have you ever seen people in love? Do they look intoxicated? Are they always smiling? Are they spaced out? There's actually chemicals being excreted in their body. And they just have to be with one another, and they're madly intoxicated by being with one another. And because of those chemicals, they don't even see the faults in one another. And that's what we define as love. And after those chemicals wear off, different psychologists give it different lengths of time, but let's say 2 years. 2 years maximum. After, some say 6 months. I guess it depends how much chemical you were excreting, how much you were in love. But when it wears off, sometimes they'll say, I don't love you anymore. Because their definition of love was chemicals being excreted. That was their experience of love. They don't know that's their definition, but that was their experience. But we understand that the relationship of a man and a woman is meant to enhance our spiritual life. So it's not about chemicals, it's about love of Krishna. And if we can work together to love Krishna, that's perfect. And part of that working together to love Krishna is the fact that I made a vow in front of all these devotees of fire, my spiritual master, to stay with you. And that's significant. And now we're saying, chemicals are not firing, your hair's getting gray, your belly's getting big, and there's a lot of new brahmacharinis in the temple. They look way better than you. So, it's time to part, and we can fire some new chemicals. Of course, we don't say it that way. But why is it that we so easily can leave someone that we vowed to take care of the rest of our life, or we vowed to serve the rest of our life? That says a lot about people's level of commitment and integrity now, presently. And truthfulness is waning in Kali Yuga, correct? So it seems to me it's a huge problem. Now, how many of the devotees who take initiation let's say, how many of the people who took initiation 35 years ago are following all the 4 principles and chanting 16 rounds? Does anybody know if there are any surveys? Or anybody like to guess? Can we give a generous 50%? I think that's generous. One guru was told, he was giving initiation on that morning, he said, do you know that 50% of the people you're initiating are going to leave you, or not going to follow the principles? He said, yes, I know, but I don't know which ones are the 50% that are going to stay and leave, so I have to initiate all of them. So, people are coming to ISKCON brought up in a culture where 50% of them are making vows at initiation and making marriage vows and breaking them. Where I can guarantee you, in Abraham Lincoln's time, if ISKCON existed and people were joining, the rate would probably be like somewhere between 5 and 10%. And it wouldn't be any easier for people to do it, but they had a higher level of integrity. It was a different culture. And in that culture, when you said something, that was it. You just did it, whether you liked it or not. I was with an elderly couple many years ago in Delhi. So we'd stay at their house all the time. And we'd observe the relationship. This was 2007, no, 97, 2000, yeah, it was 20 years ago. And she was like 75, he was 80. 20 years ago. So you could understand that generation. And we're watching the interaction. And the interaction was the husband's the boss and the wife is the servant, kind of that traditional role. And the husband was sometimes a little abrasive and not sweet, like sandpaper. You know sandpaper? It's abrasive. Toothpaste, abrasive. Little rough. And we looked at the relationship, and from our Western perspective, it looked like a pretty bad relationship. So we were just interested in saying, you know, this relationship you have with your husband, and she gets up in the morning, she does yoga, she chants japa, he gets up hours later, she's doing puja, she has to stop her puja to make him coffee, this and that, and toast, and then goes back to her. It's like they had two different lives, two different worlds. He seemed just to have his own world, and she would kind of serve that, and not much was going on together, and they'd fight like this and that. So we asked them about it, and said, you know, it doesn't look like you really get along. She said, no, we don't. We don't get along at all. And she said, but of course, there's no question of divorce. It's just, it didn't matter that they didn't get along because they made their vows of marriage, and if they didn't get along, they just didn't get along. And so they just dealt with it. He had his life, she had her life, and that was it. It wasn't about chemicals. It was about integrity. That's just, they made their vows, and, you know, we get along, we don't get along. So you can see that today it's a lot different. Right? Even you have a nice wife and husband, but they get a little fat, and you want to trade them in for a new model, a slim model, isn't it? And they're perfect. They run, you know, you trade your car in, but it runs well. But you want the red sports car, so you know. So that's going on now. Like the 50-year-old guy, he trades in his wife, the 47-year-old, for the 29-year-old. Because somehow or other, the men are so immature, the 29-year-old girls like the 50-year-old men now. So this is what's going on. And so I think we're all affected by it to some degree, depending on our culture and our upbringing. So now, that's what I wanted to say. I think it's clear that, you know, little things become big things. We're not aware of the promises we make. We don't always take... You say something and you don't realize you said it. I made a vow, 16 rounds, 4 regular principles. How deep did that go? Did I actually realize that I made it? Did it just go here, here, here? And how far down did it go? Okay. Shanagati had a question, and Silita had a question. And
how to then explain about the integrity, how to increase
how to increase integrity.
Because this, as you mentioned, this is because like the America some years ago was different from now.
So how to increase integrity? Good question. I think if we understand everything I'm saying and meditate on it, it can act as a motivating factor. I think the Abe Lincoln story is inspirational. In fact, I think, this may sound strange and some people may disagree, but I think sometimes stories of non-devotees are more inspirational because we're supposed to be better than them. And when they do something better than us, it kind of hits us. It was like when we first came to India as Americans, it hit the Indians. And they'd look at us and they'd say, we're supposed to be doing what you're doing, and we've given it up. So I think when a non-devotee is doing what we're supposed to be doing, or saying things that we're supposed to be saying, it has a very powerful effect. So I think that story, I think understanding how if I'm not cautious about the little things, it's going to affect the big things. And, you know, most of us will get married or are married, so we're going to make a very heavy vow. You know, a marriage vow is almost like a vow of celibacy. It's almost like brahmacharya, if you actually follow it, because you're restricting your sex life. So it's a heavy vow. The understanding of how it's degrading our sense of self-esteem, that every time we don't keep the vow, it's lowering our consciousness. And then I think and then bringing awareness, just becoming aware every time you do it and catch yourself, oh, I completely forgot that I told this person. Then, or sometimes you don't tell them, you just say, can you do this tomorrow? And you just nod your head. And you nodded it, but it didn't go anywhere. And becoming aware, I just nodded my head. I just said, yes, I was going to do that. Part of this is sometimes to say, no, I can't do that, because when you nodded your head, you didn't have any intention of doing it. So better just to say, no, I can't. And then the stories of people who live with integrity. There's a story of Bhakti-tirtha Maharaj dying of cancer in extreme pain, and he had vowed to chant 20 rounds every day, and Radhanath Swami said, you don't have to chant, you're in too much pain. He said, no, every day I've chanted 20 rounds, and that's my vow to Prabhupada, and I won't stop, even though it was so difficult. Jayananda Prabhu, dying of leukemia, up every morning 3 o'clock in the hospital chanting 16 rounds. Very inspirational. Another one of our members who donated land to us and helped us, and we kind of abused his help. We took advantage of it to the point where he didn't feel a desire to help us any longer, because we really, really took advantage of his generosity. And he told me, he said, actually, I don't know why I help you, because you've abused my generosity. I've helped you, and I said, do it this way, but then you did it that way, and then it complicated it more for me to fix it. I was already fixing it, but I needed you to do this to fix it. And you did that, and you made it worse. And that happened so many times. Said, I don't feel like helping you anymore. And then he said, I don't even know why I help you. You ever said that? You ask yourself, I don't even know why I'm doing this, because it doesn't make sense. So that's what he was saying. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why I help you, because you keep abusing my help. And then about 30 seconds later, and he said, I know why I help you. He said, because Prabhupada asked me to help, and I said, yes, I would, and that's why I'm doing it. So that story struck with me, that here is a man of integrity. He was of another generation. And he didn't want to help us anymore, but he remembered his promise, and he said, that's why I'm doing it. So I think hearing these stories are very valuable, because in our culture, the stories you're hearing about people who don't follow vows and people who rationalize it, isn't it? Because we're really good in our culture at rationalizing. Bhishma made a vow, that was it. When Bhishma made his vow, he said something later, which is very interesting. He was talking about, he said, people say I'm a great brahmachari. He said, Krishna's a real brahmachari. Because he's surrounded by all these women. And if I were surrounded by all these women, I couldn't maintain my brahmachari. So we think when Bhishma said brahmachari is this big, amazing Kshatriya, grandsire of the dynasty, that when he said it, he was so powerful that for him it was like easy. Or we say in English, a piece of cake. It was like, that doesn't make sense, right? It was a piece of cake. I don't even know what that means, why we say it. Anybody know? It was a piece of cake.
Easy to eat.
Yeah, maybe easy to eat, yeah. Easy to eat. But then Bhishma reveals that if he were in Krishna's position, he couldn't maintain his brahmacharya. So it wasn't that easy for a Kshatriya to be a brahmachari. That was unusual. So, we have many examples in Mahabharata and Bhagavatam, people who said, I'll take a vow. And then within Kshatriya circles, when you give your word, that's it. And the Kshatriyas, they had fighting codes. So they all agreed to fight by these codes. Right? There was you all know Warren Buffett. He's like one of the wealthiest men in the world. He gave a lecture at a business school, and he said something like, if you're going to hire someone for a company, you want them to be enthusiastic, intelligent, and have integrity. So these are the three qualities. Enthusiasm, intelligence, and integrity. And he said, but if they don't have integrity, the enthusiasm and intelligence is actually going to destroy your company. So, hearing these things, it brings awareness of how helpful it is and how necessary, and also how detrimental it is when we don't have it. So I think hearing about it, reminding ourselves, being aware, and hearing inspirational stories about people who gave their word, and associating with those people. Like this couple, it was a great lesson to me. They didn't even like one another, but there was no question of divorce. It wasn't ever thought of, because once they made the vow, that was it. I asked another devotee, I said, why is it that in India today, still, divorce rate is in the few percent, 3% or something. Does anybody know? 5%. It's still low. And his wife said, when we grew up with the concept, you get married once. And you may not realize it, but we in the West do not grow up with that concept. You don't realize that you grow up with the concept that marriage is not only once. So we're actually growing up with concepts that are antagonistic to integrity. So they have a joke. Somebody gets married and one of the relatives says to another relative, she looks like she'll make a great first wife for John. A great first wife for John. And usually the mother saves her wedding gown, because when the daughter grows up, she'll give it to her daughter. But now they say, I'm going to save it for the next marriage. Now there was one devotee, he had been married many times, and now he was on his third or fourth. So one very, very funny devotee was asked, are you going to the marriage? He said, no, I'll go to the next one. He's from New York, and he's Jewish, and so that was classic for him. So that's the culture that we're being raised in, and we don't realize it. That we're impregnated with all these impressions of a lack of integrity. You see, if your parents and you're talking about doing something, and your kids hear it that's not thoroughly honest, they get the impression that that's how you do things. So we're surrounded by it. We're obviously surrounded by politicians who are not honest. American politicians only do about 35% of what they say they're going to do. Latest statistics I heard is 1 out of 7 American corporations is caught in some fraudulent activity. That's a very high percentage. So we're surrounded by so much of it, and it becomes normal. So like us as Americans, when we first came to India, the prices were doubled. We'd ask, you'd go up and it's 20 rupees, I'd go up and it's 40 rupees. So, like for us as Americans, that's like completely dishonest. But for an Indian, that's just smart, because you have so much money, and 40 rupees for you is damn cheap, Baba, even though it's only 20 rupees. So Prabhupada used to call us damn cheap Babas, because every time they double the price, we'd go, oh my God, that's damn cheap, and we just pay the price. And then the Indian devotees would say, they're doubling the price, don't pay that. And then we learned whenever they'd say 40, I'd say, I'll give you 20. And they'd go 30. And I go, I'll give you 20. And they go, okay. And they were happy. And so that didn't sit right with us. But you go to America, and that same product is 800 rupees. That's the very same thing that you get in India for 20. In America, it's the equivalent of 800 rupees. And we think that's honest. So all the cheating has gone in behind the scenes. In India, it's in front of you. In America, it's all wrapped up, because you're in a store that has marble floor, so it's 800 rupees. And it still costs them 20, and another 10 to get it over into their store. Right? So for us as Americans, we didn't like that. So if you come from a culture like that, where doing that is normal, you just have to understand you'll be somewhat influenced by that. You won't think there's anything wrong with that, because that's what everybody does. right? There's a website, all the things to tell a cop when they stop you for a speeding ticket, to get out of the ticket. I forgot what they are, but the guy who said it, he said they all work. My kid just got hit with a baseball bat at the Little League game, and he's bleeding, and I have to take him to the hospital. Okay, go. Things like that. Anyway, so, that's the culture. So to be aware of that is, to be aware of what you do and how you're affected is helpful.
Question related to that in our society and Islam. So how to also increase because everyone comes from different backgrounds.
Yeah. So he's asking how in our society, if we come from these conditioned backgrounds, can we create a culture that's more full of integrity by the leadership acting with integrity. So if the leadership don't act with integrity, then nobody's going to feel, number one, that they really are compelled to, or subconsciously it'll just come down to you and saying, well, that must be the way we do things here, and or when you become a leader, you'll do the same thing. So everything starts with leadership. So whatever the leadership models, that we get the impression that that's what we're supposed to do. And so if you're ever a leader, just be aware that what you do has ramifications. Like sometimes we've had meetings and asked questions like, your temple doesn't have any money for rent, it needs $1,000. You're on the street, you find a wallet with $1,000, and there's the license in there, the phone number. What do you do? Interesting question. Now, philosophically, we would say, if this were 1970, we would say, hey, if he gives $1,000 to pay the rent,
Krishna blesses.
He'll be blessed. I mean, that's like the best thing he could do. Later on, in later years, we would say things like, we need to show the example of integrity within our society and have faith that Krishna will provide the rent money. We don't need to steal someone else's money. So we would look at it more of its effect on us. Earlier days, we were looking at its preaching effect. Like, well, that's $1,000. That's hard to get in 1970. And obviously, Krishna sent it because the rent's $1,000. So it must be meant for us. So, later on in ISKCON, the issues became more of example, became more of how does it personally affect us. But philosophically, you could justify it. There's, that was his tough luck. That guy was stupid. He didn't take care of his wallet. So Krishna must want me to have it. And I'll just mail his wallet back empty. In some cases, you could call the person and say, have your wallet, and they might just, if they're wealthy, give you the money. Or who knows? Okay, so you had a question, comment?
Yeah, you sort of covered it. The first one was about how our own integrity affects other people's integrity.
Yes.
And the second point was pretty much comes under the managing your life in such a way that if someone says, can you do this? And even though integrity-wise you haven't good intention of doing it,
Yeah.
you obviously
Can't.
you take it on too much so that everything gets knocked on. So,
So that's an important part of honesty is being honest about what you can't do.
Yeah, and saying I can't do it today.
Yeah. Or I can't do it in this lifetime. Or, have you ever asked someone, can you do this? And they say, I'll think about it. So generally, I'll think about it as a polite no. Isn't it? No? I mean, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But it's probably better for us to be a little more clear and say, either say, I don't think I can, or give me a few weeks, because right now I can't see that I can do it. so you don't mislead people. It just helps in relationships. And I think it also helps your own empowerment, because then you're just being honest and not feeling that I need to make everybody happy so that they all like me. But they'll still like me if I don't help them, because they're probably not going to like me when I tell them I can do it and I don't do it. And sometimes people appreciate it. They say, well, thanks for being honest, because people tell me they're going to do things. If everyone who said they were going to do something for me did it, the things they said, I'd be pretty famous right now. I'd be on TV. I'd be, have done programs in like 20 major corporations. I'd probably have done TEDx talks by now. I'd probably be kind of wealthy, maybe a TV show by now. I mean, yeah, I would have had a TV show. People say all these things because they want to do it. They actually feel, I want to do this service. But they're not thinking practically that they could actually do it. And I think the intention is to please. Like in Indian culture, you would never say something disagreeable to an elder. You always want to say something pleasing. So you might say something pleasing that you don't believe or that you're not going to do because that will be good for the, you feel it'll be good for the relationship, or it's the right thing to do. So a lot of people, they'll do that. It's kind of out of their culture. I want to encourage you and make you feel good. And then the person you've told you're going to do something to is now waiting for you to do it and is very much let down. They may have changed their plans because you said you were going to do something. And they don't call you back when you ask about it. They don't return emails. They don't return text messages. Whereas a few weeks before, every day they were, yeah, we're going to do this and do that. And then they don't have the I don't know what the word is, guts? Something, they don't have something to just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I know I promised you, but I really overpromised and I'm too busy, or it didn't work out, I'm really sorry. Is there anything I can do to, something like that. So I find that it's not a criticism of any one culture, but there are cultures that are more like that, because I think genuinely they feel that they want to help and they should help, and they overextend themselves. And then they disappear. And this is extremely common in some cultures. It's become so common that when people in those cultures tell me they're going to do something, I make absolutely no plan to follow through unless I get an indication it's going to happen. This happens to me about every 6 weeks. It's amazing how often it happens in a certain culture. So it's something to be aware of if you're from that culture. And I think if you're from that culture, you probably know who you are, so that way I don't have to say it. But we're, just to give you a hint, we're pretty close to that culture. We're give you another hint. We're in a country that has that culture. It's rampant in this country. In the West, it happens, but it's not as rampant. It's more isolated. It's just like an individual. But in this culture, it's pervasive. It's all over the place. That's why, that's why I say it. If everyone followed through, I would be like, you'd see me on billboards all around. I'd have defeated Sri Sri Ravi Shankar by now, if we did everything we said we were going to do. Yes, you had a question.
Sometimes for devotees, it's like being transcendental, kind of overpowers this integrity, because many times devotees say that this is Krishna's arrangement, or this is Krishna's plan.
Oh, you changed the plan, you mean?
Or this, that, or sometimes they say that in the spiritual world it's also like that, because this concept of being like this integrity, being on time, and this, that, it's very Vedic. Like sometimes they make the ideas and they're supposed to be like this
Oh,
particular
yeah, right,
amount
right.
of time and this, that. But sometimes devotees can be very rasika and they
Oh,
are...
more spontaneous,
Yes,
yeah.
but at the same time, you can't say that they're bad devotees or that it's just bad. It's just not
No, yeah,
practical.
I
It just
I
doesn't
think-
get things done.
I think, okay, let me tell you a story. I love this story. This is such a cool story. And it is a little, I don't even know the devotee's name, but this devotee is going to be belittled in this story. I was doing a program, and my car was blocking the road, and it had to be moved by someone in the kitchen so he could drive his car up somewhere to get the boga. So we gave him the key, and we were about to finish the session, and I said, please make sure you give me the key back, because I was staying about 2 miles away or 3 miles away. And we were on a tight schedule, and I had to go back and eat and whatever, and then get back. So, you know, it only took him 5 minutes to move the car and do what he had to do, and there were no keys, and 15 minutes later, no keys, and a half hour later, no keys, and when the session ended an hour later, no keys. So he was working in the kitchen, so my godbrother was also working in the kitchen, and I told him, and my godbrother knew, because I gave my godbrother the key to give to him, and I told him, make sure you tell him to bring the key back immediately. So he knew. And then I told him, I said, it's time for me to go. He didn't give me the key. And he had just done a course in integrity. And the devotee who didn't get the key back was a second generation, like an 18-year-old who was raised in ISKCON. And he said, if he had taken that integrity course, he would have given you the key back in 15 minutes. That was his only comment. He was upset, and he just said, if he would have taken that course, you would have gotten your key back. So often it has nothing to do with what kind of devotee you are. It's just an awareness of relationships that you have and things that you say. So, you know, the idea of being spontaneous and so forth, that really wasn't the way Prabhupada was. He had a pretty exacting schedule. I was once with Bhakti Swami, and it was Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day, and the devotee who was assigned to cook, who would start cooking like maybe 4 in the morning, because the offering goes on at noon, came down with the flu and just didn't show up. I don't think she showed up at all. Or she showed up like very late, like 10 o'clock. So Maharaj was asking me, he said, where is the offering? And I said, she was sick. She didn't start cooking till like 10 o'clock. And he said, Prabhupada takes lunch every day at 12. We have to have the offering at 12. He was upset. So he was making the point that Prabhupada was his life was very regulated. So much so that Bhakti Swami was saying, even this offering on his Vyasa Puja Day, this is his lunch, it should be at 12 o'clock. And you know in deity worship, punctuality is one of the main principles. So, you can take this class as you like. The purpose of this class was just to bring awareness of this topic. And taking this awareness, you could apply anything and bring awareness. It doesn't just have to be integrity, it could be so many things. Correct? Yes?
How is it possible to actually say no without
Well,
straining the relationship? Because it's a problem.
just spend a few months in New York and you'll learn how. Take birth in America, you'll learn how. You see, I'll explain the Western viewpoint, and then the Western viewpoint is that honesty is valued. So if you can't do something, even though you should as a dutiful son or grandson or whatever, but you know you can't do it for whatever the reason, or you're not going to do it, the Western concept is he would be most respectful to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I don't want to lead you on and have you depend on me. I have to study, I'm preparing my dissertation, I have a job, I'm working 20 hours a day. You know, a year from now I could do it. And so that's we in the Western world, that's how we like to interact. Just this is how it is. And we would feel that it would be dishonest to say, yes, yes, I'll do it, with no intention of doing it, and then leaving that person thinking you're going to do it. I mean, if it was something serious, like going to get some medicine that was life or death, and you had no intention of doing it, obviously you would tell them. So it just requires some communication. You know how to say, you know, I'd love to do this, and I don't want to tell you I can if I can't, but under these circumstances, I think we should make a plan and find someone else who can do it, because that would be better. Let me help you find somebody. Maybe something like that. You know, I would love to help you, but I'm so, so busy. Maybe, we can talk about it in the future. And you remember the maybe. I mean, it's hard these days because we get so much communication. You get it on email, you get it verbally, you get a text message, you get a WhatsApp message, you get a Skype message, you get a Facebook message. And you're like trying to keep track of all these messages, and occasionally one slips through the cracks, doesn't it? You just forget, and you don't get back to somebody. So I have a disciple of mine put out a message on Facebook every month. If you sent me an email and you didn't get a reply, either I never got it, and sometimes I don't, or it slipped through the cracks, so please remind me. Because normally I answer my emails within 24 hours, usually 3 days at the latest. So if you haven't got it back, it means I either spaced out or I never got it. Because I have a hard time keeping up with everything. So that's just my method. At least a method, Or people say, can you come and do this and that? And I just say, please write me in March, because I'm not going to remember to write them. I'm not even going to remember their name, because I might meet 12 people in a week who want to do something with me. And that's, over a year, it's so many people. And I think if you really want to do it, you'll write me. So that's just my method. So I never promised. I said, sure, if you want to do something, write me and we can talk about it. So then I'll see if we can work it out. That's just the strategy I've taken. So I think that's my reality. And you know how many people, like people say, can you counsel me? I'll say, okay, write me and we'll set a time. Or could you give me this information? Write me and set a time. It's very efficient, because at least 50% of the time they don't write. So it just saved me 50% of my work, and maybe they resolve their problem. So that works for me. I mean, if it's that important, you'd think they'd remember. You'd think they remember mahatmadas.com. It's not that hard to remember, and you can get my email. So if they don't, then it's like, okay. So those are my defense mechanisms. Some gurus have a defense mechanism where they don't do email because it's too much. They can't keep up with it. So that's, you have to decide what works for you. Is that okay? Anything else? Yes.
Prabhu has two friends, and they were practicing at the same time.
Okay.
They could have taken initiation, but they didn't, because they were honest to themselves that they're not really, they can't
Yeah,
figure out.
that's good. Prabhupada said that. When there's a devotee here asking a similar question. I doubt I will chant 16 rounds every day for the rest of my life. So I don't have the courage to promise. And in 20 years, I'm not initiated. Could you comment? The answer... the answer is, this question came up to Prabhupada. Someone had taken initiation and they weren't following their vows. So Prabhupada had said many things, but in answer to your question, he said, why did you take the vow if you weren't going to follow? So Prabhupada was, no problem. If you can't follow, just don't take the vow until you're able to follow. Now, a lot of devotees make a connection. If I can't follow a vow, I can't have a guru. Now that may be true for some gurus, that I will not be your guru unless you follow this vow. But many people will be your guru even if you don't follow the vow. So they're your guru, but you're not vowing to them to chant 16 rounds. You're not initiated. You just tell them, I'll chant 8 or 4 or 1 or 12 or whatever. And you accept them as your Siksha guru. And your relationship can be the same as the initiated disciples. There'll be no difference. The only difference is you haven't made an official commitment. You're serving them, you're hearing from them, you're being guided by them. And the trick is that because of that relationship, there's a chance, like this devotee is saying, Fernando, he doesn't see. I thought it said Fernando Das. Fernando Dias. Dias? D-I-A-S?
Yes.
Diaz. Oh. Fernando Diaz. Fernando Diaz. He said, I don't think I'll ever be able to chant 16 rounds. But by taking shelter of a guru, maybe with his help you will be. So to think because I don't chant 16, I can't have the shelter, it works against you. But definitely don't take the vow until you're ready. Because then we make a farce of it. Like some devotees have said, if we're not stricter with devotees' vows, then it's kind of like we're encouraging people to be dishonest. Now, you don't know you're going to follow, and I kind of know you're not going to follow, but I'll initiate you because, I need more disciples and you need a guru, and so we'll just try it. So, you could make that argument that we're encouraging a relationship that's not honest. Now, some people have suggested something that would solve the problem, but probably would never pass a GVC resolution, that we just lower the requirements for initiation to something like 4 rounds, and that would enable more people to become initiated. But because Prabhupada established 16 no less, we'll probably never be able to do that. But we can establish connection with people who aren't chanting 16 rounds in guru-disciple relationships. Yes?
Я почему спрашиваю, потому что в конечном итоге итог, что они вообще не делали никаких попыток как-то свою духовную жизнь повторять круги, соблюдать принципы. То есть...
The question why I'm asking is because of that lack of commitment, they're not putting endeavors into their spiritual life, into even trying to maybe someday follow.
Okay. Because they're not committed now, their level of commitment now is low, so you don't see that in the future it's going to increase. Is that the... Yeah. Well, we have to look at Krishna consciousness in a broader sense. Because not everyone is Brahminical, and not everyone necessarily is qualified to be initiated. And the problem we have now, it's kind of like you have a bus, and all the seats are very thin. So if you weigh over 50 kgs, you can't fit in the seat. ISKCON's a little bit like that. Now, what are you going to do with all the other people who weigh over 50 kgs? They have no place to sit. Where do you put them? Oh, you can let them stand up. But the trip is 12 hours. You understand? So it's like when when the only thing is 16 rounds and 4 regulative principles, either you're in the bus or off the bus. If you're over 50 kgs, off the bus. That's part of the problem. So if this person is chanting 8 rounds and following 3 regulative principles, compared to 99.99999% of the rest of the world, he's doing really good. You agree? That's good. You can follow 3 principles, 2.5, 3.5, 2.78, 6 point, whatever. That's better than most people. So because if we look at it from this everyone should be initiated consciousness, then the 12 rounds a day, 3 principles, it looks like a failure. It's not really a failure. It's just that's a great success. If a person did that his whole life, that would be a great success. And his next life he would take up. And probably, like Fernando's saying, Fernando, I think when you get older, of course I don't know how old you are, but we all get older, but when in our older age, probably most people would become more serious, especially if they have warning that their life is going to end soon. They probably would become serious and start chanting 16 rounds, I would think. So having done the 8 rounds your whole life, when the doctor says you have 6 months to live, probably you'd knock it up. Just like right now. I was thinking of this today. This is a nice thought. Don't forget what you're going to ask. I was thinking today, I'm walking around, looking at everything, thinking about things, and I was thinking, if I had a month to live, what things am I thinking about now that I wouldn't be thinking about? What attitudes do I have now that I wouldn't have? What things am I focused on that I wouldn't focus on? Well, if you knew you had 1 month to live, and you were an American devotee, you wouldn't be looking at Donald Trump anymore. Because Donald Trump has become like one of the most attractive, if you know what I mean, sensations in America. So people are enthralled by it. It's just like it's so much entertainment to see what his next move is. So even good devotees are, and you would, you're walking by the bakery and there's this amazing cake, chocolate and cherries and whipped cream and walnuts, and you're going to die in a month. Probably it's not going to really attract you. So I think for those devotees who can't come to the standard right away, when they're older, it may not even take death, it just may take getting over 50 or 60. So you're just like, your body just goes, ooh. Your mind goes, ooh. You just don't have the energy. You get old enough, you don't have enough energy to be in Maya all the time. Because when you're young, you have a lot of energy. So that's also there. You're dying to ask a question. Yes?
Правильно я поняла, что практика является ключом к целостности? Это первый вопрос.
Did I understand correctly that the truthfulness is the key to integrity?
И какая разница
It's
между
truthfulness is part of it, but you have to expand the definition of it. In the first class, we taught that integrity means if you're truthful 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're pure 24/7. If you're clean, whatever you are, you're always that way. So that's part of integrity. That you come here and I'm very honest, and you go home and lie to everyone. Or you go to your work and you lie. In front of the devotees, you make a nice show. So that integrity means every aspect of your life is the same. So you can look at that in many ways. I go to the temple, I look like a pure devotee. And I go home and sit on the couch and watch movies and eat potato chips. Put on my jeans and t-shirt. You see? So integrity means it's not different. Integrity comes from the word integer, which means whole. Integer means it's a number that's whole. So wholeness means same everywhere. All aspects of your life are the same. So it's whole. Holistic is another English word. Like a lot of times we talk about alignment. What you think, what you teach, what you believe, and how you act, it's all the same. That's integrity. Now, there's another thing we didn't talk about, but if you love somebody and you make a promise to that person, that love becomes the motivation to follow. Because if I don't follow it, I'm going to hurt you. So many of the vows we make are made to persons. Like you could ask, if I really love my husband, if I really love my wife, how could I break my vow? I couldn't do that. Right? If I really love my guru deeply, how could I break my vow? So Prabhupada said that when that love is developed significantly, that then you can't break the vow because it affects the relationship. Just like we said, it affects the relationship with yourself, it affects the relationship with the person you made the vow to, doesn't it? I think one of the hardest things is for a devotee just to look at a picture of their guru if they've broken their vows, isn't it? That's really hard. You have a picture of your guru and you're not following the vow you made to him. So you increase your love and then you follow. Because of love you can follow.
What is the difference between vow and
Promise?
promise? Yeah, because vow is something that kind of
Heavier?
tension.
Yeah. I technically think in the English language there isn't a difference, but I would use it a little differently. Vow is something more long-term. Like I'm vowing this month to not eat sweets. Kartik, I won't eat sweets. I vow to chant 25 rounds this month. So longer. I promise to come here tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I didn't vow to come here the rest of my life at 3 o'clock. I just promised to come tomorrow. But sometimes in English we use the word, we might say, well, actually we don't. We say marriage vows, we don't say marriage promises. But so that's how I use it. Technically, it may be a synonym. But when you say, Bhishma made a promise, that doesn't sound heavy. When you say Bhishma made a vow, it's like, whoa, it hits you.
She means oath.
Oath?
Yeah, and
Oh. Well, let's say I become a temple president. I take an oath that this money belongs to ISKCON, this temple belongs to ISKCON, I manage it only for ISKCON, I follow the GBC. When I step down from being temple president, that oath, I'm not obligated by that oath because I'm not in that position. So an oath is a promise in relation to a context or a situation. At least in that example. Oaths are usually in relation to allegiance to something. You understand allegiance? fidelity, dedication. I'm dedicated to ISKCON. As gurus, we had to make oaths also. Now that you have this position, you have to make an oath that you will act in a certain way, you will represent Prabhupada in a certain way. If I step down from guru, I'm not obligated by that oath anymore. And that wouldn't be like breaking a vow, it's just the situation has changed.
Yeah, it's more based on externals, isn't it?
Yeah. Contextual, situational, environmental. You're the English teacher. What do you say between vow and promise?
I agree with what you're saying. Vow is a lot stronger, and
Yeah.
it's like...
That's it.
Vow.
Don't break it, yeah.
Promise is like more like a good intention.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you do break a promise, it's not that you intentionally break it.
Yeah,
you
that's
make
good,
that promise, your intention is genuine.
Here's the motor scooter. I need it 3 o'clock. You promised to bring it back? Yeah, I promise. 3:15, you come back. What happened? Oh. I just saw this devotee on the way back I hadn't seen in 20 years. Okay, so yeah. But, if it's a vow, now it's heavy. Right?
Yeah.
For devotees, we have much more, it seems like devotees have much more reasons for these circumstantial, unexpected things, because there's so many relationships for devotees.
Oh, so many things.
Realizations going on internally and externally and everything, and that's why it's like sometimes for devotees it's really like, Mataji was even telling me that some devotees say it's better to work with karmis because karmis are more stable. For devotees, like they're going here and then they're there and then
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed in devotee circles, which relates to this problem of saying we're going to do things we don't do. I think part of it is we get excited about doing something and we see the need for it. So we start envisioning, and that vision inspires us. But our plates are already full. And we actually aren't going to have time to do it. Or if we have time, we're not going to have time to do it well. And so I have lots of conversations with the devotees, not just Indians, but just devotees in general, about doing things that later on fizzle out because both of us just never had the time to follow through. And sometimes I'm working on things that were discussed 3 or 4 years ago, and now we're working on it because our lives have afforded us the time. We get so excited about it. Prabhu, why don't you come here? You could do this and that. I was going there, and all of a sudden now, I'm over here. I was just walking home, and no, but we have 20 devotees. Could you take them to Yoga Peeth and call your wife? I won't be home for dinner. Yeah, so that's the point you're making, that our lives are living in this society with so much work to do, we can get pulled around. I go to a temple, and sometimes I get all the problems of the temple dumped on me, like the first day I get there. And I was just going there to do some workshop. And now I'm like, could you come to the meeting? Could you be on the board? It's true. It is the nature of life here, especially if you're willing to do things and you're good at things. Yeah. But now we're bringing awareness to this, what we can commit to and what we can't, right? I can say personally, I had to become focused on less things to accomplish because I was too spread out. And maybe 6, 7 years ago, I became like the king at refusing. Oh, Prabhu, can you come to this? No. I'm focused on this, I can't, I'm sorry. I was refusing maybe 80% of the things that were asked of me. And that was the only way I was able to succeed at what I was doing. Otherwise, I do many things a little bit, and the thing I need to do doesn't happen. So I think that's something, like we heard today in class, a story about Arjuna hitting the Eye of the Bird, about focus. It's such an amazing story. How many of you heard the story this morning? Most of you. How many of you heard the story? You didn't hear it, unless you were watching. Anyway, focus. What's important. Now we'll just end here. This devotee's asking, can you explain which is superior, internal or external integrity? Well, external will manifest from internal. But if you don't have the internal integrity, at least have it externally until you get it internally. So sometimes you have to do it externally to get it internally. But ultimately, if you don't get it internally, it won't last. If you don't get it internally, it may not last. But you can't wait to get it internally if you don't have it. So that would be part of the answer to your question, is just live it, even if you don't have it. That's part of, I'm going to practice it. There's there's concepts in Buddhism which are the practice of mindfulness, or the practice of detachment, or the practice of the middle path. It's all, you're not there, but you practice it. So that's important. Okay? Is that all right? You allow me to go and take prasadam? Okay, thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol.
Jai.
Gaura Nityananda Hari Bol. There's normally I give class Monday, but I'll be in meetings on Monday. So see you next Saturday night, I guess.
Wasn't there some system in ISKCON? I don't know. It was there a few years ago where you could become like something like a Krishna sadhak.